who is Gregg Vanderheiden. Gregg, of course, is a faculty member in the College of Information Studies and director of the Trace Center.
Thank you very much. I've been asked to talk about the Trace Center, and this is the 50th anniversary of the Trace Center. So I'm going to try to cover 50 years in 15 minutes. So we'll move along kind of quickly, but if you have questions or anything, we can always talk about these later. So the Trace Center began in 1971 when David Lehners tricked Gregg Vanderheiden into going to a local school to see if there was a way that a 12-year-old who couldn't speak or write, had cerebral palsy, could be given a means of communication. And together they formed a group of undergraduate student volunteers, which then grew. It swiftly grew to 21 different volunteer students from 9 different departments and 5 different schools. And the initial focus was just on providing one child, Lydell, with an independent means to write and to communicate. The problem was that whenever somebody wasn't looking at his board all the time, he had no way to communicate, no way to do homework, no way to participate in the class. And he only had a wooden board with letters wood burned into it. The first auto monitoring communication board was created out of military surplus parts by the students. Later, with special permission from the university chancellor to allow a student to be a principal investigator, the students developed with NSF funding portable user programmable aid and successfully transferred this into production with telesensory systems. Then the team continued on, and it took on the Trace Center moniker and expanded its work over the decades into augmentative communication, interface, computer access, and universal design. In the first decade, the focus was on augmentative communication, and this is actually a term that was coined by the Trace Center and later came to be the name of the field. The first portable user programmable communication aid was developed, as well as the first portable speech communication aid. Now I say portable with quotes on it because it was based on the Deck Talk at that time, which was meant to be plugged into the wall and drew 5 amps. We hooked it up with a battery. We redid all of the ROMs so that it would turn on, speak, and then turn back off again. It was attached to the back of a wheelchair and was used by a wheelchair-bound individual for his first speech communication aid. The portable. We also started compiling information on all of the augmentative communication and interface devices for people with disabilities. And we started an annual resource book series. If anybody's interested in sort of the history of any of these areas, we actually have every year a catalog of everything available internationally in these areas. Back then, there were about 15 companies making different adaptive devices and control switches. And it turned out that no 2 of them accidentally used the same connector. And so we, with a grant from the National Science Foundation, we developed a standard for interconnection between these aids and their interfaces. And that standard is still used today. We also created a national workshop series, a 3-day workshop series, and gave these all across the country. I think we gave about 30 of them over the years, really taking this brand new field and getting it off and launched. And then we began to work on computer access toward the end. In the 80s, the focus expanded to include computer access. We laid out the computer accessibility landscape with 2 articles in Byte in 1982. We also did the first device that could be used for communication, writing, and computer access. It was called the Trine. And then we launched another workshop series, this one on computer access. Here, we were looking to try to not only introduce how to provide access to computers, but introduce microcomputers really for the first time. So for a lot of people, they'd never seen them, they've heard about them, they didn't know how they could be used. And so we had to change first on how to use the microcomputer, what it was, and then how to provide access to it. In 1984, the first White House Summit on Computer Accessibility was held, and I, along with Larry Scadden, who was blind from the National Science Foundation, and Frank Bau, who was deaf from Hofstra University, made the case to industry for accessibility. And that led to a second White House conference in 1985, where we had developed the first computer accessibility guidelines. And then finally, we began developing software and accessibility guidelines first for the Information Technology Foundation. We created the first scorecard used internally by Apple for accessibility in the 1980s. Interestingly, at that time, I was engaged by Apple to come in and work with their developers, and I had the ability to go anywhere and see anybody and talk about anything in the corporation in order to try to get all of their products more accessible, something that doesn't happen today. We also created the guidelines used internally by Microsoft and IBM in the 1980s, as well as many other companies. In the third decade, the 90s, we added the web. We saw the Trace Center techniques being built into Stephen Hawking's communication aids. 8 of the first 10 accessibility features in Microsoft Windows were licensed royalty-free from the Trace Center. The first consumer product accessibility guidelines were created. And this was the first time that epilepsy and seizure disorders, et cetera, made it into guidelines so that people were protected against seizure disorders. And we'll see more about that in a bit. Also, web accessibility guidelines. The first ones were right after, in January 1995, right after the WWW2, I'm missing a W on there. And true to the times, you can see that it was done in text format, because in those days, the only universal document format was text documents. And so this was the first time that web guidelines came out. But over the next few years, 38 different guidelines came out. So we then created unified guidelines because nobody knew which ones to follow, that brought together all of them. And the version 8 was used as the first working draft for WCAG 1, which came out in 1991. And Trace Center provided one of the co-chairs and 2 of the 3 editors for WCAG. We also did a lot of the research that went into these, including the color contrast and seizure disorders, in order to quantify them and so that they could be actually included in standards. We also began at this time, over this period, summative information. You saw the original books that we were publishing. Well, we then moved them into CDs so that everybody could have an electronic searchable version. We created hyper-able data and DOS-able data so that we had both Mac and PC versions of the able data database for the first time available on everyone's computer who wanted it. And then we moved able data onto the web. The fourth decade, we look at really universal design. We're looking at design of augmentative communication, interface, computer, web. We were one of the co-authors of the Universal Design Principles, and particularly making sure that they covered and applied well to ICT. We did the first public kiosk with built-in accessibility in 1999 in the Mall of America, and the first cross-disability voting prototypes in 1999. We were also asked to exhibit in the Grand Foyer at the White House in 1999, a very interesting experience. Sometime I can tell stories about this. And there was also a turning point about this time. The opening keynote at CHI 2001 was with Bill Gates, but I was asked to do the closing keynote about accessibility and about how this was something that applied to everyone. And the whole conference began to focus and was focused on basically everyone, anywhere access. So that for the first time, instead of the accessibility being a little small part, the idea of making ICT so that everyone could use it was starting to go mainstream. That year, we were also asked to co-design the National Library Services digital talking book player as they moved from tape recorders into a digital format. And we began seeing the work that we had done on cross-disability accessible public systems. So we see this now built into Amtrak machines. This is the automated postal systems at the US post offices across the country. This is an airport kiosk, security kiosks that you see at the airport. The kiosk accessibility work was featured in a Smithsonian exhibit. And we had developed now the Trace photosensitive epilepsy tool. This is actually an example of it analyzing the video clip of Pokemon. In Japan, they showed this cartoon on television, and sent 350 children to the hospital. They then decided to show it on the evening news, and they sent another 350 kids to the hospital. So a lot of attention to being able to make sure that when we create things that are flashy and entertaining, that they can be accessible. However, the only tool for assessing it cost $30,000. So we developed an open source version, licensed an engine, and made it so that it was available free, so people could analyze their web content and videos. We also created a 3-part international standard on remote and alternative interfaces and intelligent agents, and WCAG 2.0 also came in this section, and we provided the co-chair and 2 of the 4 editors for those guidelines. You'll now find trace-based research in all of the different accessibility standards used internationally. In the 5th decade, which was the 2010s, we got together with a consortium of people from around the world to try to build what we call the global public inclusive infrastructure. And one of the things we came out of this was auto-personalization. Another one was we created a unified listing that brought together 12 databases from all over the world around ICT and made it so that in one place you could search and access all of the information from all of the databases. We also developed something called the developer space, and the developer space is available to allow people to find information who want to create accessible materials, but don't know where to find guidelines, techniques, strategies, et cetera. And in there is a very valuable master list of accessibility strategies, which I recommend to anybody interested in exploring the area. We also worked on simple and ultra simple interfaces and the first auto personalization of computers. The first installation on demand, AT Anywhere, the ability for someone to sit down to any computer at a library, a university, whatever, and have the assistive technologies they need show up instantly on that machine. And then when they get up and leave, go away. And also the first cross-platform simplification of the built-in features in these products. Now, we are now heading into Trace Center's 6th decade. And some of the areas that Trace will be exploring going forward include aging and dementia. And many of these you'll see throughout the conference today. Advancing cognitive accessibility, inclusive AI, teachable interfaces, AI and privacy, cross-disability and multidisciplinary access techniques. We have lots of techniques for single disabilities, but people don't just get one disability. Often they will have multiple, and the strategies need to be able to accommodate this. A one size fits one design principle. Instead of thinking about universal design being what interface can everybody use, which doesn't exist, how do we make interfaces so that they will automatically personalize to each individual to fit their needs? Fully open source tools, we have photosensitive epilepsy tool and others that we're trying to get all of them into full open source capability. Better tools for content creators, software developers, and managers. Research that supports data-based accessibility policy. Ubiquitous accessibility in AT. That is the ability for accessibility in AT to be everywhere that you go so that you don't have to be using special devices or only work in special places. And probably our biggest lift is going to be a complete rethinking of next generation ICT, completely rethinking how we go about doing it from policy to implementation. Our current strategies are failing, particularly around cognitive, but in all of the areas. And with the new technologies and new interface technologies, it's going to be even worse. And this is the team that's going to make it happen. So this is the core researchers at the Trace Center, Amanda Lazar, Hernisa Kokori, Darren Jordan, Jonathan Lazar, no relation to Amanda Lazar, and Gregg Vanderheiden. And there's another whole, again, as many associate faculty and 5 times as many students, et cetera, who are all affiliated that are making all of this happen. And finally, I'd want to acknowledge quickly just some of the many funding agencies that have helped to make this possible. So thank you. It's been a great 50 years, and we are now heading into our second half decade of contribution to the field. Thank you.
So we have time for just one or two questions. If there are any, remember that you can use the Discord channel. I believe you can type in the chat too if you're an attendee for any questions. I would applaud Greg for this amazing body of work. And I remember you spoke at a couple of years ago at the Symposium, and you talked about your moonshot idea. So it looks like you have many moonshots now lined up. But what do you think? What do you think of your? What's the status of this moonshot, and what's the big thing that you would see in the next 50 years?
Well, two separate questions. And the thing I see for the next 50 years is all the research of all of the other investigators. As I come to the end and they're at the beginning, it's a whole new era in the Trace Center, and it's going in many additional directions in a much fuller range than it's been possible to do in the past. And this is fantastic. And one of the reasons why we moved the Trace Center from Wisconsin to the University of Maryland. With regard to the other shot, that was the Morphic project, and you can see more about it at morphic.org, and that's now just been released. It's an open source accessibility for Windows and Macintosh. And it is, as I said, this month it's reached its full release. The thing that we have discovered there is that there are people who just have trouble using technology, and not because they're of an IQ or anything like this. We know people that are blazingly brighter than we are who can't use it. But we'll be talking more about that at the last presentation of the HCIL, so I won't take the time now to talk further about it here.
Let me ask another question from the audience. So Karen asks, if you were an incoming freshman, what area would you be most excited to study?
Interface, human interface, to me, the focus of HCIL. We are reinventing the entire world, and it's going to be a really interesting one because we think of interface as the device, and the interface is something a device has. But over the next decades, we're going to see the interface be something that is a melding of the human and the machine together. And so everything we think about interface is going to change. But everything that people can do is also going to be mediated by this. And so it's going to be an amazing area to do, and probably one of the most fascinating, and require more backgrounds in more areas than we've ever seen. So it'll be a blossoming of interdisciplinary, because there won't be any other way of doing it.
Great, thank you, Greg. I know there's a few more questions. I'm, in the interest of time, going to let Greg and other Trace faculty answer them in the Discord or the Zoom chat. So thank you, Greg, for your talk.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.